The first sound was not a voice, but a whip cracking through the dry morning air, splitting silence into two jagged pieces. Dust rose like smoke from the wooden boards of the platform, where two women stood with rope binding their arms to their sides. They were not cattle, not beasts, not things to be bartered, but that was how the town looked at them. 28 years old, sisters in blood, or perhaps only in fate, their faces bore the stubborn beauty of women who had learned how to survive. One wore a deep blue dress, threadbare yet proud, stitched with beads that shimmered faintly in the sun. The other's burnt orange garment was frayed along the hem, but turquoise stones hung at her throat, gleaming like fire against the dirt. Their eyes were not broken. They glared back at the men before them, eyes that said we are still alive. The sheriff's voice carried above the mutters of the crowd, a cold drawl sharpened by authority. He wore a long black coat, dust on its hem, and a hat pulled low enough to shadow his scowl. His boots struck the boards like hammers as he paced before the women, gesturing to the townsfolk gathered in the square. Men with vests and wide hats leaned forward, some smirking, some whispering as if at an auction for horses. Women in prairie dresses stood on the boardwalk, children clutching their skirts, their gazes a mix of pity and disdain. The sheriff did not hesitate. He spoke of price, of worth, as though these women were weight and muscle alone. The words stung like grit in the eye. No one questioned. No one protested. In the dust-choked silence of the frontier, cruelty had long become a spectacle. One of the women, the one in blue, shifted her weight. Her chin lifted, proud despite the rope biting into her skin. She would not lower her gaze, not even as the sheriff barked at her to stand still. The crowd chuckled, the sound like glass breaking under boots. Her sister's hand brushed hers, bound close, a silent reminder that they were together. That for now was their only mercy. And then, through the murmur of offers and jeers, came a voice unlike the others. It was not loud, not cruel, not eager. Just a steady tone, like a river cutting through stone. The crowd stilled. A man stood at the edge of the square. 38 years old, broad-shouldered, sun-worn, with hair touched by dust and eyes carrying a weight the others lacked. He was a rancher, his coat plain, his boots traveled, his hands marked by work rather than indulgence. He did not leer at the women, as though measuring livestock. He studied them as though listening for something deeper, something beneath the surface noise of the sheriff's words. The sheriff squinted, annoyed at the interruption. A number was called out, firm and unflinching. It was higher than any had dared. Silence fell heavy. Men in the crowd shifted, muttering, unwilling to match it. No one laughed now. The sheriff slammed his fist against his thigh, frustrated but bound by his own rules. He spat the acceptance, the gavel of his voice sealing the deal. The two women, for the price of coin, were his. The rancher stepped forward, boots sinking into the dust. The crowd parted with murmurs and narrowed eyes, their curiosity sharpened into suspicion. He climbed the steps without haste, his presence as quiet as it was immovable. His hands reached for the rope, not roughly, not with the sharp jerk of command, but with the careful patience of one who knew how to handle frightened horses and frightened hearts alike. The knots came loose under his fingers. The women stared at him, confusion flickering beneath their defiance. The sheriff sneered, muttering about fools wasting good silver. The townsfolk laughed again, though the sound was thinner now, unsure. As the rancher led them down the steps, one of the women broke the silence. Her voice was cracked but clear, carrying the weight of disbelief. Why, she asked, would he buy them? Her words fell into the dust, waiting for the sting of mockery, the blow of indifference. The man did not turn to the sheriff, nor to the crowd. He turned only to them, his voice steady, quiet, unyielding. I'll take you home. Laughter rippled behind them like dry leaves in wind, cruel and mocking. But the women's steps faltered not from the crowd's noise, but from the strange, dangerous thing that trembled inside them. Hope, thin as smoke, fragile as glass, yet alive still. Dust rose as they walked off the platform, 3 shadows cast long across the square. The sheriff spat again, the crowd jeered, but none of it mattered. For the first time since the rope had bound their arms, the two women were walking towards something they could not yet name. The whip cracked once more, far behind them now. But no longer sounded like power. It sounded like the end of chapter. And ahead, the road waited, wide and uncertain. The storm came without warning, tearing across the plains with a voice like thunder dragged through iron. Wind screamed through the grass, whipping cloaks and hair, scattering dust into the night. lightning split the horizon, a jagged scar of white fire. The three riders pressed forward, their horses restless, hooves sinking deep into sodden earth as the sky itself seemed to rage. The sisters clung to the saddle behind the rancher, their breath sharp in the cold air. Rain hammered down, stinging their faces, washing away the dust of the town, as though trying to scrub clean the cruelty that clung to them still. When the rancher finally slowed, it was at the shelter of a rocky outcrop where the storm's fury could not quite reach. He dismounted first, steadying his horse, then turned to the women. His hands, roughened by work yet careful as if handling glass, lifted them down one by one. For the first time since the auction block, their feet met earth not as prisoners, but as people free to stand. Yet freedom felt strange, almost too heavy to carry. The woman in blue stepped back, arms folded tight, as though the rope still bound her. She studied him, suspicion etched into every line of her face. Why, she asked again, had he done it? Was it pity? Was it power hidden under a softer mask? Her voice shook, not from weakness, but from exhaustion of years spent mistrusting every hand that reached toward her. The rancher did not answer quickly. His silence was not the silence of evasion, but of thought. Finally, he said only that no one should be treated like beasts. The words were plain, yet they held a weight the women could not ignore. Still, plain words did not erase scars. They ate by the fire he built, bread from his satchel, jerky softened by rain, water gathered in his flask. The orange-dressed woman took food with trembling hands, her turquoise necklace catching the flicker of flame. Her sister watched, still wary, as though waiting for some cruel twist. But none came. The rancher spoke little, letting the crackle of the fire fill the silence. He asked only if they had names. The first woman lowered her gaze before speaking. Her name left her lips like a fragile song nearly forgotten. The second followed, her tone firmer, protective, as if to shield her sister from harm. The rancher nodded once, repeating each name as though to carve it into memory. Not as possessions, but as people. The storm softened into a drizzle, the plains hushed beneath its afterbirth. They mounted again at dawn, the land wide and empty before them. Hours passed in silence, the sun dragging shadows across the earth. Coyotes watched from the ridges, eyes glinting in the morning light. The sisters whispered to each other when they thought he could not hear. Fear still clung, like a second skin they could not yet shed. By noon, one found her voice again. She asked what awaited them at his ranch. He said only, choice. The words sat heavy between them, unfamiliar. She pressed further. What did he expect in return? His answer was the same, calm as a river's flow, nothing. But disbelief lingered. Men who bought women always wanted something. The woman in blue turned her face away, unwilling to trust a promise that felt like a dream too fragile to touch. Her sister, though, studied him longer. She saw no hunger in his eyes, no mocking edge in his tone. Only steadiness, which frightened her more than cruelty. It meant he might be telling the truth. When the ranch finally rose in the distance, it was no mansion of power, but a modest homestead. A barn leaned gently into the wind. Lanterns glowed in windows, and fields stretched wide with grass bending in rhythm to the breeze. It was not a cage. It was a place where life had been quietly built, brick by brick, day by day. The rancher dismounted and held out his hand, not to command but to invite. They hesitated, the weight of years urging them to refuse. Yet something in the lantern glow, something in the stillness of his waiting, made the moment tremble. They stepped down without his help, their feet sinking into the soft earth. He turned to them, voice quiet but firm. This is your home now, if you choose it. The words struck like thunder, louder than any storm. For the first time, they were not bound by rope, not held by command, but faced with something far stranger, freedom wrapped in a man's honesty. They stood frozen at the threshold of a new life, hearts beating with a terror greater than chains, the terror of beginning again. And from the dark of the barn, a shadow moved, unseen by them, unseen by him, watching.